A millionaire businessman plans something horrible against his wife's deaf daughter by making his fiercest horse attack his helpless stepdaughter. But the cruel plan transforms into a scene that no one could ever imagine, as what happens left everyone speechless. If you're an animal lover like us, subscribe to the channel now so you don't miss any heartwarming stories. Thanks. Now back to our story. Vanessa walked into the study without knocking as usual. Her perfectly manicured red nails contrasted with the black folder she held against her chest. Edward briefly admired the navy blue dress she wore, so different from the floral and delicate dresses that Clara, his wife, favored. Edward ran a hand through the graying hair at his temples, a gesture that betrayed his anxiety. "It's all under control, Vanessa. In a few weeks, we'll have the money we need to—" A barely audible creak from the door caused Edward to stop mid-sentence. Through the reflection in the glass, protecting an old photograph on the wall, he saw a familiar face. Beatrice, his 14-year-old stepdaughter, was watching them through the crack in the partially open door. Her large brown eyes were wide, fixed on their lips. Edward's heart turned to ice. Beatrice was deaf, but her lip-reading skills were extraordinary. For a fleeting moment, their eyes met in the reflection. The girl silently disappeared down the hallway like a ghost. Vanessa walked to the window, watching the rain that was now falling harder. Her eyes fixed on Thunder, the majestic chestnut stallion grazing alone in the field. A cold smile formed on her lips. Edward approached the window, stopping next to Vanessa. In the reflection of the glass, he could see his own eyes, now darkened by a grim determination. "We can't let a deaf teenager destroy everything we've built." That same afternoon, Clara was in the kitchen brewing tea when Beatrice rushed in, her hands moving frantically in sign. The mother tried to follow her daughter's rapid gestures, but the girl's agitation made it difficult to understand. Beatrice took a deep breath, her eyes welling up. She began to sign again, more slowly this time, but was interrupted by Edward's sudden arrival. He entered the kitchen with a forced smile on his lips, kissing Clara's cheek. The girl recoiled instinctively, her hands falling limp at her side. Clara, oblivious to the tension between the two, smiled sweetly at her husband. Edward smiled, but his eyes remained cold. "How sweet," he said, placing a possessive hand on Clara's shoulder. "By the way, honey, I was thinking, how about a romantic weekend? Just the two of us." Outside, dark clouds gathered on the horizon, and lightning began to streak across the sky. The rain intensified, pelting the mansion windows with increasing fury, as if nature itself sensed the tragedy that was about to unfold. The next morning, the sun timidly tried to break through the clouds that still hung over the property. Beatrice woke up early, as she always did on Saturdays. It was the day she usually spent the most time in the stables, taking care of the horses, especially Thunder, with whom she had developed a special connection since moving to the mansion with her mother. As she walked down the hallway towards the kitchen, her steps silent on the hardwood floor, Beatrice noticed movement in Edward's study. The door was closed, but through the crack at the bottom, she could see shadows moving. Her heart quickened as she remembered the scene from the previous day. In the kitchen, Mrs. Davis, the housekeeper who had worked for Edward for years, was preparing breakfast. The elderly woman smiled warmly at Beatrice, even though she didn't know sign language. They had developed their own form of communication through simple gestures and facial expressions. Beatrice took an apple from the fruit bowl and signed "thank you," which she knew Mrs. Davis would recognize. She was about to leave for the stables when her mother entered the kitchen, radiant with happiness. Beatrice's smile vanished instantly. Her hands moved quickly. "Don't go, Mom. Please stay here with me." "Good morning, ladies." Edward's voice interrupted the moment. He entered the kitchen adjusting his tie as if he were about to leave for an important appointment. His eyes fixed on Beatrice's hands for a moment before turning to Clara. "Have you told her the news yet, dear?" Edward approached Beatrice, placing a hand on her shoulder with a gentleness that didn't reach his eyes. "Don't worry, sweetie. I've left specific instructions so you can take care of the horses just like you always do, including Thunder. After breakfast, while Clara went upstairs to pack, Beatrice escaped to the stables. The familiar smell of hay and leather calmed her, and the soft sound of the horses moving in their stalls, which she felt through the vibrations in the ground, always brought her comfort. As she stroked the animal's neck, Beatrice noticed movement at the entrance to the stable. Edward was talking to John, the stable hand, gesturing towards Thunder's stall. The stable hand seemed worried, shaking his head negatively, but Edward insisted, his authoritarian posture leaving no room for argument. John finally nodded, defeated, and left the stable. Edward then turned and met Beatrice's gaze. For a moment they stared at each other through the dim light of the stable. A slow, calculated smile formed on his lips. Beatrice felt Thunder stir behind her, as if the animal also sensed the veiled threat in her stepfather's words. Edward turned and left the stable, leaving behind a heavy silence and a sense of imminent danger. On the desk in the study, an old photograph remained hidden in the locked drawer, a smiling man next to a young chestnut colt. On the back of the photo, a date and a name almost erased by time. Ricardo Mendez and Thunder, 2009. Note: the name Ricardo Mendez is kept as is, since it's related to a picture and not necessarily tied to the US context. Friday afternoon dragged on as Vanessa waited in her office downtown. Her fingers drummed impatiently on the glass desk when her cell phone vibrated with a message from Edward. "Everything is set. We leave in 2 hours." Her gaze wandered to an old cardboard box hidden in the back of her closet. Inside it, yellowed blueprints from 15 years ago waited, silent, guarding secrets she preferred to keep buried along with their true owner. "Honey, are you sure you don't want to tell me what's bothering you?" Clara signed, sitting down next to the girl. Beatrice shook her head, frustrated. How could she explain to her mother what she had seen? How could she make her understand the gravity of the situation without sounding like a teenager jealous of the new marriage? Edward remained in the doorway, his eyes fixed on his stepdaughter. "You know, Beatrice, I've always admired your intelligence, especially your ability to observe." He articulated each word clearly, making sure she could read his lips. "But sometimes observing too much can be dangerous." In the stable, John, the stable hand, watched Thunder with concern. The stallion was restless, swirling the water in his trough with his muzzle, as if he sensed something was wrong. John took a sample of the water in a vial, determined to take it for analysis as soon as possible. Mrs. Davis was supervising the loading of the suitcases into the car when she noticed something strange. There was a small extra suitcase in the trunk, hidden under the other luggage. When she tried to mention it to Edward, he quickly dismissed her with an excuse about important work documents. The sun was beginning to set when the couple finally left. Beatrice watched from her bedroom window as the car disappeared through the main gate. In the distance, she could see the stables and the restless silhouette of Thunder against the orange sky. In her office in the city, Vanessa was finishing the last preparations. Her phone rang. It was an international call. "Yes, the tickets are confirmed," she said in a low voice. "In a week, we'll be out of the country. No, there won't be any problems. The deaf girl won't be an obstacle." The resort was 2 hours away, up in the mountains. Edward had deliberately chosen an isolated location where no one knew his face or his connections. The plan was in motion, each piece carefully positioned. Back at the mansion, Beatrice sat down at her desk and began to write frantically in her diary. Her fingers flew across the paper, recording everything she had witnessed in recent days. When she finished, she hid the notebook under a loose floorboard, a hiding place that not even her mother knew about. On the wall of her room, an old photograph of her biological father watched her with gentle eyes. Ricardo Mendez smiled from the photo, a tall man with a kind expression, next to a horse that looked eerily like Thunder. Beatrice had never noticed this resemblance before. Night fell over the property, bringing with it a disturbing stillness. In the stables, Thunder remained agitated, as if sensing that something terrible was about to happen. Edward's plan was in motion, but fate, like a skilled weaver, was beginning to intertwine threads that no one had foreseen. Saturday dawned with a thick fog blanketing the property. Beatrice woke with a start to the vibrations of Thunder's hooves against the stable floor. She could always feel when the horse was especially agitated, even from her room. Mrs. Davis was preparing breakfast when Beatrice entered the kitchen. The housekeeper noticed that the girl looked pale and tired, as if she hadn't slept well. She tried to communicate through simple gestures, offering a cup of hot chocolate, but Beatrice just shook her head negatively. At the mountain resort, Clara woke up alone in the room. She found a note from Edward on the nightstand. "Went to take care of some business. I'll be back for lunch." She sighed, a little disappointed by her husband's absence so early in the morning. What Clara didn't know was that Edward was in room 507, 3 floors above, planning the next steps with Vanessa. "The Green Horizon documents are almost ready," she said, spreading papers on the bed. "As soon as the last investors sign, we can transfer everything to our offshore accounts." Edward smiled coldly. "Thunder is adequately prepared. John informed me that the horse is more aggressive than ever. It's just a matter of time." But Beatrice couldn't ignore the animal's agitation. She cautiously approached the stall, and Thunder immediately calmed down upon seeing her. It was as if only her presence had a calming effect on the stallion. While stroking the horse's neck, Beatrice noticed something different in his water. There was a slight oily sheen on the surface, almost imperceptible. She took out her cell phone and photographed the water trough, sending the image to Helen, a veterinarian who sometimes assisted in the treatment of the horses. At the resort, Clara decided to surprise Edward. She found out at the front desk that he had a business meeting at the hotel and decided to bring him breakfast. When she asked about the meeting room, the receptionist seemed confused. "We don't have any meeting rooms reserved today, ma'am." Intrigued, Clara returned to the room. Her cell phone vibrated with a notification. Someone had tagged her in a post on social media. It was an old photo from 15 years ago, showing a group of people at a grand opening. Her eyes widened as she recognized Vanessa in the photo, much younger, next to Ricardo, her deceased first husband. The girl ran to empty all the water troughs, her hands trembling with effort and worry. Thunder watched her intently, as if he understood the gravity of the situation. At the resort, Clara rummaged through her memory, trying to understand the connection. How could Vanessa be in that photo? Why had Edward never mentioned that his partner knew Ricardo? In the stable, Helen arrived breathless. She examined the water in the troughs and her face paled. Through gestures and expressions, she managed to communicate to Beatrice that someone had deliberately contaminated the water with substances that would make the horses extremely aggressive. In his room at the resort, Edward received a call from John. "Sir, there's something wrong with the horse's water. The vet is here and—" Meanwhile, Beatrice found something surprising at the bottom of Thunder's stall. An old identification tag, partially buried in the straw. As she cleaned it, her heart raced. Engraved on it was, "Thunder, property of Ricardo Mendez, 2009. 15 years ago, Ricardo Mendez was not just a successful businessman, he was a visionary in the sustainable construction industry. Helen signed that she herself had worked with him on several projects, including a revolutionary housing complex that integrated green spaces and therapeutic equestrian centers. Beatrice watched intently every movement of Helen's hands, her eyes widening as the revelations unfolded. The veterinarian picked up her tablet and showed old photos, architectural plans, project sketches, and one that made Beatrice's heart stop. The original design of what Edward now called Green Horizon. At the resort, Clara was sitting on her bed, surrounded by old photos she had found online. Each image was like a piece of a macabre puzzle she never knew existed. In one of them, Vanessa appeared as an intern at Ricardo's company, always in the background, always watching. Clara frowned, a feeling of unease growing in her chest. She decided to go down to the front desk to try to locate Edward. On the way, she heard raised voices coming from room 507. She immediately recognized Vanessa's voice. Clara froze in the hallway, her heart pounding violently. The door to the room suddenly opened, and she hid behind a large, ornamental plant. Edward hurried out, followed by Vanessa. Both were carrying suitcases. Thunder watched everything from his stall, his intelligent eyes fixed on the two of them. The horse seemed calmer now, as if Helen's presence also brought him memories of the past. Helen paled upon seeing the results. Her hands trembled as she signed to Beatrice, "Your stepfather planned everything. He wanted thunder." At the resort, Clara followed Edward and Vanessa discreetly through the service hallway. Her cell phone vibrated again. Another message from Mrs. Davis, this time with photos of what was happening in the stables. Upon seeing Helen in the images, Clara felt her legs weaken. Back at the stables, Beatrice found the courage to show Helen her diary, where she had recorded the conversation she had witnessed between Edward and Vanessa. The veterinarian read each word with growing horror, recognizing in the subtext a pattern she had seen before. Mrs. Davis watched everything from the stable door, her face etched with worry. Even without understanding sign language, she could feel the gravity of the situation. She decided to do something she had never done in her years of service. She went to Edward's study and began searching his drawers. In the last drawer, locked but easily opened with a bobby pin, a skill she had never admitted to possessing, she found an old folder. Inside it, yellowed newspaper clippings reported on the accident that had killed Ricardo Mendez. In one of the clippings, partially hidden among the mourners at the funeral, was Vanessa. At the resort, Clara followed the couple to the parking lot, her heart beating so loudly she feared being discovered. Her phone vibrated once more. It was Helen. The message made her blood run cold. "Clara, we need to talk about Ricardo, about how he really died, about what Vanessa did." The wind began to blow harder as Helen finally revealed her true identity to Beatrice. She was not just a veterinarian, but Ricardo Mendez's sister. Her hands trembled as she signed the story she had kept for 15 years. Beatrice watched, mesmerized, as Helen continued her narrative. The veterinarian explained how Ricardo had developed a unique connection with horses, especially with Thunder, whom he had bought especially for Beatrice when she was born. At the resort, Clara followed Edward and Vanessa to the parking lot, keeping hidden behind the cars. Her cell phone continued to vibrate with messages from Helen, each one more disturbing than the last. The latest made her heart stop. "Vanessa was involved in the accident that killed Ricardo. I have proof." Inside the stable, Thunder remained strangely calm, his intelligent eyes fixed on Helen as she signed. It was as if the animal also recognized in her something familiar, a connection to the past that everyone had tried to bury. Mrs. Davis, still in Edward's study, continued her frantic search. Under a pile of documents, she found something that made her gasp. A series of old emails between Vanessa and a mechanic, dating from the week of Ricardo's accident. The messages were clear and incriminating. Helen showed Beatrice more photos on her tablet. One in particular caught the girl's attention. Her father, much younger, demonstrating riding techniques for deaf children. It was his dream, Helen signed, to use horses as a bridge between the worlds of silence and sound. In the parking lot of the resort, Clara watched Edward and Vanessa hurriedly placing their suitcases in the car. An envelope fell from Vanessa's purse, scattering photographs across the ground. Even from a distance, Clara recognized her deceased husband in several of them. On the property, Beatrice and Helen continued their intense conversation inside when John, the stable hand, ran into the stable. He gestured frantically, showing his cell phone. Edward and Vanessa were coming back. Mrs. Davis, having found all the evidence she needed, ran to the stables. On the way, she crossed paths with John, who was installing extra security cameras at Helen's request. The housekeeper handed the documents she found to Helen, who examined them with tears in her eyes. The sky was darkening rapidly, as if nature itself sensed the storm that was to come. Not just the meteorological storm, but the explosion of truths long suppressed. Clara, in her own car a few miles behind, kept a safe distance as she followed the couple. Her hands trembled on the steering wheel as Helen's words echoed in her mind. How could she have been so blind? How had she not noticed the connections, the signs, the lies? In the stable, Helen finished telling the story to Beatrice. The girl now understood why she had always felt such a strong connection with Thunder. The horse was not just an animal, he was a living link to her father, a silent guardian who had patiently waited for the moment to reveal the truth. Beatrice hugged Thunder's neck, her silent tears soaking the animal's mane. The horse responded with a soft whinny, as if promising that this time justice would be done. This time, silence would not be complicit in the lie. Helen, upon hearing the car, quickly instructed Beatrice through signs. "Stay with Thunder. Don't leave the stable, no matter what happens." The girl nodded, her heart pounding as she watched her newfound aunt hurry out. Edward jumped out of the car before even turning it off completely, his face contorted into a mask of fury. Vanessa followed closely behind, her usual composure replaced by a palpable nervousness. "You have no right to be here," Edward growled, climbing the steps two at a time. "Don't I?" Helen opened the folder, revealing the printed emails. "It's interesting how people keep evidence of their crimes, isn't it? Especially in drawers they believe are securely locked." "Explain what, Edward?" Clara's voice trembled slightly. "How you and Vanessa planned to get rid of me and my daughter, or how you stole Ricardo's designs." "You don't understand," Vanessa stepped forward, her voice taking on a persuasive tone. "Ricardo was a fool. He was going to waste those projects with his ridiculous ideas about accessibility and therapy. We just... Shouldn't your daughter be in the stables right now, near Thunder?" His voice dripped with malice. "Such an unpredictable horse, so dangerous." "Impossible," Vanessa murmured, recoiling instinctively. "The water, the substances..." The sound of sirens began to echo in the distance. Mrs. Davis had discreetly alerted the authorities as soon as Edward and Vanessa arrived. The world seemed to freeze for an instant as the metal of the gun glinted in the twilight. Vanessa, her hands trembling, pointed the weapon indecisively between Helen and Clara. Thunder reacted instantly to Vanessa's sudden movement. The stallion reared slightly, but Beatrice, demonstrating extraordinary skill, remained firm on his back. The connection between the two was palpable, as if they were one being. But there was something in his eyes, a calculating glint that Helen recognized immediately. He was preparing to use the situation to his advantage, to present himself as the voice of reason. The sirens were sounding closer and closer. John, demonstrating surprising courage, began to move discreetly to get a better recording angle with his cell phone. "A damn genetic coincidence," Vanessa screamed. "Ricardo could have been so rich, so successful. But no, he wanted to use his gift to help special people." Her voice dripped with contempt on the last word. As if to confirm her words, Thunder moved forward a few steps, moving with a feline grace despite his imposing size. Beatrice, still mounted, maintained a serene expression that contrasted dramatically with the chaos around her. Clara's words seemed to hit Vanessa like physical blows. Her hand holding the gun began to tremble more violently. "And you saw an opportunity," Helen completed. "You convinced Edward to marry Clara to gain legal access to her fortune, while planning to run away together with the investors' money." Edward grabbed Vanessa's arm, not to disarm her, but to try to take the gun for himself. In the confusion of the moment, a shot rang out. The sudden movement unbalanced Edward and Vanessa. The gun fell, sliding down the steps of the staircase, while the police officers advanced with weapons drawn, shouting orders. The next few hours unfolded like a fever dream. The property was overrun by police officers, investigators, and forensic experts. Edward and Vanessa were handcuffed and placed in separate police cars, each trying desperately to negotiate their situation by blaming the other. Beatrice remained close to Thunder, who refused to leave her side. The stallion, previously considered problematic and dangerous, now exhibited a surprising docility under the girl's gentle touch. John, the stable hand, watched in amazement as he collected samples from the water troughs for forensics. In the living room of the mansion, Clara sat on the sofa, still trying to process the events of the night. Helen was beside her, translating the conversation with the investigators into sign language. The revelations continued to emerge, each one more shocking than the last. "Mrs. Caldwell," said the lead investigator, consulting his notes, "we found records of suspicious bank transfers between your husband's accounts and an offshore company. The dates coincide with the period of your first husband's accident. We also discovered," the investigator continued, "that Ms. Vanessa Torres worked as an intern at Mr. Ricardo Mendez' company. She had access to all the designs, including the original Green Horizon project. Inside the box, in addition to the incriminating emails that Helen had already discovered, there were old photos, newspaper clippings, and most importantly, a thumb drive. When its contents were checked, it revealed a gold mine of evidence. Scanned copies of Ricardo's original designs, deleted emails, and surprisingly audio recordings. In the first audio, dated 15 years ago, Vanessa's voice sounded younger but no less manipulative. "Edward, think about it. Ricardo is suspicious. If he reveals that I stole the designs, everything will be lost. We need to act now." "Your father would be so proud," Helen signed to Beatrice. "He always said that silence allowed us to listen with our hearts." In the study of the mansion, the forensic experts discovered more compromising documents. Architectural plans of Green Horizon showed crude modifications over Ricardo's original designs. Where there had once been spaces planned for animal-assisted therapy and inclusive living areas, there were now only conventional commercial structures. "They didn't just steal the designs," Helen explained to the investigators. "They destroyed their essence. Ricardo dreamed of creating spaces that integrated people with different needs, places where children like Beatrice could feel truly welcome." Outside, night had completely fallen over the property. The lights of the police cars were still flashing, creating dancing shadows on the walls of the mansion. In the stable, Beatrice remained with Thunder, as if the stallion were an anchor of tranquility amidst the chaos. John approached with the preliminary results of the water analysis, a mixture of irritating substances that, under normal circumstances, would have made any horse dangerously aggressive. The fact that Thunder had resisted the effect of the drugs when near Beatrice was further proof of the extraordinary bond between them. "As Ricardo always said," Helen signed to her niece, "animals see the truth that exists in our hearts. Thunder recognized in you the same love and purity that he saw in your father." Clara watched her daughter from afar, her heart overflowing with love and admiration. Amidst all the darkness that had been revealed, Beatrice shone like a beacon of hope and innocence. Her daughter was not just a survivor, she was an heir to Ricardo's most precious legacy. His ability to transform silence into understanding and differences into special gifts. In the weeks following that revealing night, the Caldwell mansion underwent a profound transformation. The oppressive silence that had once hung over the property gave way to an atmosphere of renewal and hope. The investigations continued, bringing to light more details about the extensive web of lies woven by Edward and Vanessa. Helen practically moved into the mansion, helping Clara reorganize not only the house, but also their lives. The two women developed a close friendship, united by their love for Beatrice and the memory of Ricardo. "Look at this," Helen signed to Beatrice, who had approached curiously. "It's your father's dreams for this place." "The absence of spoken words," he had written, "allows us to develop a deeper form of communication. Horses respond to our energy, our gestures, our true essence. He was so ahead of his time, Clara commented, her voice choked with emotion. While others saw limitations, Ricardo saw possibilities. That same afternoon, the investigators brought more news. Forensic analysis of Vanessa's computers revealed a detailed history of her actions over the past 15 years. She had not only stolen Ricardo's designs, but also systematically manipulated information to cover her tracks. "We found deleted emails," the investigator explained, while Helen translated for Beatrice. "Vanessa had been planning this for years. She waited patiently until Edward bought this property to put her plan into action. Edward, in turn, was desperately trying to negotiate his situation, offering to expose even larger schemes in exchange for a reduced sentence. His revelations exposed a network of real estate fraud that stretched back for years." John, the stable hand, watched in amazement as the girl worked with the animals. "It's incredible," he commented to Helen. "It's like she was born for this, just like your brother." At night, while organizing the documents they had found, Clara discovered yet another surprising revelation. Ricardo had left detailed instructions on how to implement his therapeutic center project. Every aspect had been carefully planned, from the physical structure to the training programs. Spring arrived, bringing with it winds of change for the Caldwell property. The lawyers had finalized the process of transferring Edward's assets, and Clara now had full control over the mansion and the stables. The fraudulent Green Horizon project had been completely dismantled, and the investors were being reimbursed. One especially luminous morning, Clara gathered Helen, Beatrice, and a team of architects in the living room. Spread out on the coffee table were Ricardo's original blueprints for the Therapeutic Equestrian Center. The architects were amazed by the innovative vision of Ricardo's projects. His ideas, considered revolutionary 15 years ago, now seemed even more relevant and necessary. Beatrice watched everything with bright eyes, her hands moving rapidly as she contributed her own ideas. Through signs, she suggested adaptations and improvements based on her personal experience with the horses. In the stable, Thunder seemed to feel the energy of renewal that hung in the air. The stallion was more alive and energetic than ever, especially during his sessions with Beatrice. John, who continued as stable hand, documented in amazement the evolution of the relationship between the two. "It's like he's two different people," the stable hand commented to Helen. "With Beatrice, he's gentle as a lamb, but he still maintains that strong spirit that makes him a natural leader among the other horses." A renowned architecture magazine published a special feature on Ricardo's original projects, highlighting how his ideas about inclusive spaces were decades ahead of their time. The article caught the attention of organizations and experts across the country. Helen received daily calls from professionals interested in learning about and collaborating on the project. Occupational therapists, veterinarians specializing in equine therapy, and educators from the deaf community offered their support and expertise. "Ricardo would be so proud," Helen signed to Beatrice one afternoon, as they watched the workers begin renovations on the stables. "Your father always said that one day the world would understand the importance of creating truly accessible spaces." One afternoon, while organizing old photographs, they found a particularly touching image. Ricardo, much younger, riding Thunder, teaching a group of deaf children. The smile on his face reflected the same light that now shone in his daughter's eyes. The renovation work progressed rapidly. The old stables were modernized, maintaining their rustic charm, but incorporating state-of-the-art assistive technologies. A covered arena was built especially for the equine therapy sessions, with a special floor and adapted equipment. Beatrice actively participated in the entire process, always accompanied by Thunder. The stallion seemed to understand his role in the new project, behaving with a perfect blend of gentleness and nobility that impressed everyone. The big day finally arrived. After 6 months of intense work, the Ricardo Mendes Therapeutic Equestrian Center was ready for its grand opening. Colorful banners decorated the entrance to the property, and a steady stream of cars drove up the dirt road leading to the transformed mansion. The place was unrecognizable. The old stables had been completely renovated, maintaining their historic structure but incorporating modern and accessible elements. A gentle ramp replaced the old steps, allowing easy access for wheelchair users. Signs in Braille and universal symbols guided visitors, and discrete screens displayed information simultaneously in text and sign language. Beatrice, dressed in an elegant riding outfit, prepared for the main presentation of the day. Thunder had been brushed to a shine, his chestnut coat gleaming in the morning sun. The stallion seemed to understand the importance of the moment, remaining majestically calm while Beatrice adjusted his tack. "You look beautiful," Clara signed, approaching her daughter. She wore a light blue dress and on her lapel a special brooch, a silver miniature of a horse, a gift that Ricardo had given her years ago. The guests began to arrive: local officials, equine therapy experts, representatives from disability support associations, and, most importantly, families with children who would be the future beneficiaries of the project. John, still responsible for the care of the horses, led small groups on tours of the renovated stables. He proudly explained how each space had been designed to provide comfort to both the animals and the future students. When the time came for the official ceremony, everyone gathered in the new covered arena. The space was impressive. Accessible bleachers circled the central area, and a natural lighting system made the most of the daylight. "Today," Clara began, her voice choked with emotion, "we are not just opening a therapeutic center. We are realizing the dream of a man who believed that our differences are not limitations, but special gifts that make us unique." Ricardo Mendes dreamed of a place where people of all abilities could meet, learn, and grow together, where silence was not a barrier, but a different form of communication, where horses like Thunder could help build bridges between different worlds. At that moment, everyone's eyes turned to the entrance of the arena, where Beatrice appeared riding Thunder. The girl and the stallion moved in perfect harmony, performing a series of movements that demonstrated the extraordinary connection between them. Beatrice's presentation was not just a demonstration of equestrian skill, it was a living testament to her father's legacy. Each movement, each gesture, each moment of attunement with Thunder echoed Ricardo's vision of how horses could transcend barriers and touch hearts. Beatrice's presentation left the audience in a state of grace. Silent tears ran down many faces as the girl and Thunder performed their silent dance in the arena. When they finished, the applause was not only audible, dozens of hands rose, waving in the air in the gesture that represents applause in sign language. Helen approached the microphone, her voice trembling slightly with emotion. "As Ricardo's sister, I always knew that his work was special. But to see his daughter here today, continuing his legacy in such a beautiful way," she had to pause to control her tears. "It's as if Ricardo himself is present through her." A little girl in the audience, no more than 6 years old, also deaf, tugged on her mother's sleeve and signed excitedly, "I want to do that too. I want to be friends with horses like her." Clara watched everything from the stage, her heart overflowing with pride and emotion. Beside her, Dr. Miller handed her an official envelope. "The final documents from the case," he explained. Edward and Vanessa confessed everything. The complete story of how they planned Ricardo's accident, how they stole his designs, how they waited all these years to put the plan into action. But Clara barely heard the investigator's words. Her eyes were fixed on Beatrice, who now dismounted gracefully from Thunder and began to interact with the children who were approaching the horse curiously. John, observing the scene, commented to Helen, "You know, in my 30 years of caring for horses, I've never seen anything like this. It's as if Thunder knows exactly what each child needs. More patience with some, more energy with others." The afternoon progressed, and the guests began to circulate around the property, getting to know all the facilities of the new center. There were therapy rooms equipped with state-of-the-art assistive technology, living areas designed to promote integration, and even a small museum dedicated to the history of the place and Ricardo's pioneering work. On a special wall of the museum, a large photograph of Ricardo smiled at the visitors. Beside it, articles and reports told not only the story of his tragic death, but mainly his legacy of innovation and inclusion. "This is what Mr. Mendez always wanted," she commented to Clara. "A place where no one felt different for being different." Helen found Beatrice in the stable and signed, "Your father used to say that horses are bridges between worlds, the world of silence and the world of sound, the world of limitations and the world of possibilities." In the study of the mansion, now transformed into the project's administrative center, Clara organized the last documents of the day. Among them, she found an envelope that she hadn't noticed before. Inside, there was an old letter from Ricardo, kept by Helen all these years. "If you are reading this letter, something has happened to me. I have been sensing that Vanessa is plotting something. I found evidence that she has been copying my designs, especially those for the therapeutic center. Tomorrow, I intend to confront her with the evidence I have gathered. But that is not what I want to talk about. I want to talk about Beatrice, my little silent star. Since she was born, I knew she would be special. Today, watching her with Thunder, I was sure. She inherited not only my deafness, but also my gift with horses. If something happens to me, make sure my daughter knows that her silence is her greatest strength, that her difference is her most precious gift." Outside the study, the sun set over the renovated property. The last golden rays illuminated the newly installed plaque. Ricardo Mendez Therapeutic Equestrian Center, where silence speaks. Her father's words echoed in her heart. Now she understood completely. It had not been by chance that Thunder had returned to her life, that he had resisted Edward's drugs, that he had protected her in the crucial moment. The horse had been her silent guardian, patiently waiting for the moment to help her reveal the truth. Beatrice's hands danced in the air. "I'm thinking that Dad was right. Silence was never a void to be filled. It's a space where deeper truths can be heard." That night, as the property rested under a starry sky, a new era began. In the years that followed, hundreds of lives would be transformed in that space. Children and adults with different needs would find there not only therapy, but understanding, acceptance, and infinite possibilities. Ricardo's dream finally came true, not only in the physical structures of the center, but in the spirit of each person who passed through there. His legacy lived on through Beatrice, who would grow to become one of the most respected experts in equine therapy in the country. And so, where there had once been secrets and darkness, now flourished a place of light and hope, a sanctuary where silence was not absence, but presence, where differences did not separate, but united, where each whinny, each touch, each smile told a story of overcoming and love. In the former Caldwell mansion, now transformed into a beacon of inclusion and possibilities, Ricardo Mendez's legacy lived on in every corner, in every gesture, in every life touched. And Beatrice, his daughter, had become the guardian not only of his dreams, but of a universal truth, that the heart always finds a way to be heard, even in the deepest silence.